Now, on Front Row, we've tended to celebrate the beautiful and the successful in sound and visual arts, but we're going to try something a bit different. So a question for you. Think of vinyl records and the images on their covers and see if you can guess what connects these. So you heard in order Prince's Love Sexy, Dolly Parton's, I think it was called Bubbling Over, the album, and Queen's The Miracle. All have made their way into Steve Goldman's 500-plus collection of terrible record covers. He's been collecting the questionable album artwork from charity shops and online marketplaces over a 7-year period, and they are now on display at the wonderful Williamson Gallery and Museum in Birkenhead. So today we're going to discuss the art of terrible record covers with the curator of the Williamson, Niall Hodson, who's on the line from BBC Merseyside, and with music journalist Jude Rogers, the author of The Sound of Being Human, who also says she is a big fan of a terrible record cover. Now, the ones we just played, those are big names, Niall, but they aren't typical of what one browsing through a charity shop record bin might think of as a terrible record cover. And I want to take us back to the Hungarian folk songs we played at the start of the programme, which was released in the Eastern Bloc days. Can you describe what the image is on that album cover? Can you remember it?
Yeah, I'll struggle a little bit, but it's a kaleidoscope image of the same man's face, the same sort of Hungarian folk singer, grinning face appearing about 40 times in a kaleidoscope on the image of the cover. So it's quite a jarring and hypnotic thing to look at.
Yeah. Now, you've curated the covers into different sections for this display, haven't you? Can you talk us briefly through the way that you've themed them and broken them down before we get into the nitty-gritty?
They sort of theme themselves. So you mentioned the sort of folk and traditional albums, so there's a group of those. Animals and animals appearing on covers are quite common. Then you've got exercise, teaching records, religious records. Food appears an awful lot, but I would say the biggest themed group in the exhibition is, albums that are about love and seduction, as you might expect. Some doing it more successfully than others.
And we should say that Steve, whose collection deliberately does not collect covers which are overtly sexist or homophobic. So in that sense, although some of them are very disturbing to look at, they're not offensive. What did you make of the selection, Jude, as far as you've been able to see some of them?
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm a big fan of the terrible cover. Although a lot of the time, I just love a terrible cover because quite often it's about the resources that person had or that record label had, trying to make something that stands out. A lot of it is about vanity of certain kinds of men. The amount of flesh in this book that is just quite...
Yeah, we should say there's a book that goes with
not
the exhibition.
sexy.
Yes. Well, Niall, would it be fair to say that they are predominantly, these covers reflect male obsessions? Some of the features. There's a man who's naked but licking his guitar, for example. I mean, that's sort of typical.
Yeah, I mean, one of the album covers that had a member of our staff at the Williamson in stitches is The Nimble Fingers of Jean-Pierre Jumet, who is it's an album cover that shows the torso of a man playing an acoustic guitar, and he's wearing a dinner suit on the top half and a bow tie, but he's just not wearing any trousers. And it's a recurring feature, I'm afraid, throughout the exhibition of men in various states of undress, but looking, it has to be said, very comfortable in their own skin and very and very at ease with
body
presenting
positive.
themselves in this way.
Is that the word you're talking
precisely.
about?
So Carlos, the French singer, with a "Yeah aujourd'hui," which is just Carlos in a bath with a pint of gin, and very comfortable with it, and it's quite an appealing cover in a certain strange way.
Yeah. Jude, I noticed that a lot of them seem to be Dutch or German albums.
Yes. I'm not quite sure what that says about our European, friends and cousins. I think there's a lot of folk music as well, isn't there? The accordion placed,
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm looking at that one now. He's got the accordion over an important part of his anatomy.
But it's funny because I'm from Wales, and there's a lot of kind of little Welsh labels. You go on charity shops, you'll just see these things that are obviously made very cheaply, but it's people having fun with it, and that's what I really like about it.
Can I ask I will. Sorry, no, go ahead, Jude.
I will happily go and rummage. I buy things just because they look hilarious. If they're less than £2.
Well, what's interesting, when I came to see the exhibition now, Steve told me that some of them, the really scary ones, like with weird European faces doing strange things with rabbits, they were like £300 online. So there's obviously a knowing market for these things. And I'm interested in some of the art techniques that make the worst album. A lot are from the 70s, aren't they?
A lot are from the 70s. So, I mean, you could also group the records in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and ones that are really massively of their time. And Jude was mentioning there, as you might expect, that like the smaller bands, the traditional bands, folk bands, low budget records don't look great. But then you have the other end of the spectrum where in the 80s you've got artists like George Harrison with Cloud9 and Bob Dylan with Empire Burlesque, where they're just sort of going down a rabbit hole of high 80s trash. And the album covers aren't bad, they're just so much of their time. So both of those just feature the George Harrison and Bob Dylan on the front cover, but the clothes, the graphic design of it is unmistakably of its time. The classic of that is Paul Young's No Parley as well, which you can even bring to mind the pink cover just with a mention of it.
Oh, I like that one. Anyway, they're of their time. I was thinking as well how there's airbrush, there's photo manipulation. There are strange sets in the days when you had to kind of construct a set and sit on it. But I know that one that you've picked out, Jude, is the Queen album, the Miracle one, which is early Quantel before Photoshop. It's the graphic design that was used in TV news, and it's all the faces of the members of Queen kind of merged into one multi-headed, I would say like a Hindu godhead figure.
Yes.
But you didn't like
exactly
this.
That's exactly it. I don't have it, but I remember being terrified by it when I was 11. There was in the local supermarket near ours, there was the wall of vinyl, as they used to be in the late 80s. And, Queen were doing very well at the time, obviously. So this, multi-headed beast scared me quite a lot.
Wow. See, it didn't scare me. I thought it reflected his Indian heritage.
Maybe, but kind of like... I think, it just is like we are a big band and we have access to this technology and we're going to use it in the same way that, maybe a label that's, a lot of the BBC's library music records have really, they've got access to maybe images and things. We've got this, so we use them. I've got like some of my sound effects records here that are absolutely covered with illustrations and things, and they look bizarre, insane, but they're very beguiling.
Yeah. Niall, I was thinking that there's been a poll when Steve's toured this exhibition at music festivals. They've done sort of polls of the worst ones, and there's one called it's by Peter Rabbit. It's a Roadstar rock and roll album, and it's got his face superimposed on rabbits. It is repeatedly the winner, isn't it? It's
the first one for Steve's collection. So this was an album he had when he was a kid that he's tracked down in adulthood, and it is just faces superimposed on photographs of bunny rabbits jumping out of a top hat. And the thing is, again and again, you see these album covers that have real photographic faces then superimposed on real or cartoon animals, monkeys, lions. The ultimate version of this is Roger Daltrey's Ride a Rock Horse, where he's like the upper half is Roger Daltrey and the lower half is a horse, but that's like high level expensive graphic design, and it's when it's done on the cheap, as it is with Peter Rabbit, that it's laughable.
Now when I came to the exhibition, and you had a special vitrine of accidental rudeness, I would call it. Some of the album covers more about the double meanings of words, aren't they? And they're often Dutch. Some are very religious kind of albums. There was one about the rapture which was called Don't Miss the Great Snatch.
Yeah,
and there's some others I'm not going to read out.
Jesus Use Me by the Faith Tones and God Lubricate My Bones. They're good album titles. But
there's one called The Taste of Dick Black as well.
There is. And I've got to say, sadly, our Dutch friends appear quite often in that box, just through amusing names.
Now, some covers are quite controversial in their own right, and you might not expect to see the Beatles in this exhibition, but I saw, Niall, that the Beatles Yesterday and Today, which was withdrawn at the time, was there. That was them in meat, sort of like dressed as butchers with pieces of meat and baby dolls around them, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and I mean the Beatles are no strangers to controversial album covers, so that one everyone will recognise, the butcher cover it's known as. But of course, John Lennon, not too long afterwards with Yoko Ono, had the Two Virgins album cover in which they both appear, full frontal nudity, and that was really controversial and ended up being sold in a little brown paper sleeve. And you mentioned Prince's Love Sexy, which has, Prince looking very glamorous but completely in the nip on the album cover, and that in certain markets was poorly photoshopped to make it look like he's wearing trousers.
I've got to ask Jude, is it important that these albums are innocently terrible, not deliberately bad? Because I was thinking of things like this Heaven 17's yuppie parody Penthouse and Pavement from 1981, but that's mocking that style of cover, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love that one. And I have to say, even though Love Sexy was another one that scared me when I was 10, because why was this man naked in my supermarket? But I quite like it now. And there's a few that, there's going to be some that cause controversy in this book. Like, I love Olivia Rodrigo Sour. I think is brilliant.
Why?
But I know that sort of, there are others in there that people, will like, whatever. But yeah, it's a weird one. I think that a lot of these records just, oh God, I've just got this pile of stuff here that is just, I just want to add to the exhibition, basically. Yeah, I think that a lot of the ones that in the exhibition just kind of get across this. There's almost this a golden period for it, wasn't there? Although, interestingly, I have a 9-year-old, and I've noticed that getting album covers or album art in tiny little squares to look interesting is starting to become a thing again. So I'm hoping this will come back. There is an artist called Troye Sivan who is big with the kids, and there is literally a picture of his head between somebody's legs. The legs are behind him, I hasten to add. There's nothing too X-rated. But I looked at that and thought that could be in this exhibition. Yeah. And it did grab my attention on the small screen in my car when it came on my streaming service.
Niall, is there a fond favourite for you from the hundreds you've got hanging in the exhibition?
What's really worrying is the longer I look at this exhibition and having put them up, is I'm just starting to become fond of all of them, and I don't think any of them are bad. But I've completely sort of crossed the Rubicon in that sense. But there's an album cover by a band called Battle Axe, who are from my hometown of Sunderland. It's called Burn This Town, and it's a cartoon drawing of a rock star on a motorcycle holding an axe in front of a burning town, but it's really amateurishly done. And the story behind it is apparently that the band needed to present some concept for the design to the album, to the record label, to what they wanted, and they got this local artist to draft what it might look like, sent it to the record label, and that, unbeknownst to them, just ended up on the cover. So this sort of loose sketch of what they wanted ended up being the produced article, and it does in the background appear to show Sunderland on fire, which it is just about recognisably my hometown. So I do have a little sneaking fondness for that one.
Fair enough. Niall Hodson, Jude Rogers, we could obviously talk about this for hours, but you need to go and see it and see them for yourself. Thank you both. Worst Record Covers is on at the Williamson Gallery and Museum in Birkenhead until the end of January. You can join them for the Worst Christmas Party on the 15th of December, where they'll be playing some of the tunes from the exhibition. And next year the exhibition heads to museums in Alnwick, Bradford, Warrington, Northampton and Chester. And there is also an accompanying book called The Art of the Bizarre Vinyl Sleeve, which includes a foreword by the comedian Stuart Lee. Now, imagination